Hello everyone, I'm back after a few days break. Going to give a bit of a commentary, probably an extended commentary on lecture 9 of the Foundations of Esotericism. And I've been pondering it actually because much of this lecture is a repetition of what has already been said in some of the other lectures about the senses, about that which is within us and which is without us, taking the world in, transforming it, pushing it back out through a passive and active sense. And one could say that in a way these lectures are reflected in this sentence. It is a cosmic law that what has once taken place can never vanish, but must reappear later in a metamorphosed form. Every thought, feeling and action brought about by the human being does not only affect the world around us, but will reappear in the future. And this is very much about what this lecture is about. So as we are talking about these things, we start to see that the Steiner is developing here a sense of what is developing within the human being, what is already present because of the course of evolution. So he is very clear at this point that we have 5 senses, as is well known. He puts them into a particular order: smell, taste, sight, touch, and hearing. And as he says, there's part of the sense organs that are passive, receptive, and then through our soul formation, we also have an active half of the sense. So when we come to, say, the next steps of development, hearing, we already have worked this through in a particular form in earlier lectures, that we hear things from the world, we see things through our eyes, we take them into our consciousness, we think about them, we form concepts. And the active side of the sense of hearing is speech. So once we've warmed our thoughts, once we've warmed our hearing through our thinking and our feeling, we begin to give back to the world that which we've perceived. And this is one of the things that Rudolf Steiner is quite interested in, is to show that there is the capacity for the human being to change the world by the way we do things in the world, but it's also part of our sensorium. And then he's also challenging us to some of the higher senses that might be developing on hand of things. And he does talk about how at this point in our thinking, we are transforming what we hear in the world. So what you hear through what I'm speaking now, you go away and think about it, and then you start to speak about it. And so too, there's the capacity for us to sense with our feelings. We feel in our heart, and that as we begin to develop that, the pituitary gland will start to develop into an organ. And so too with our willing. We can sense through our will things in the world, and as we evolve into the future, we will also develop a 6th and a 7th sense in the pituitary and the pineal gland, through which we can put that which is within us back out into the world. And so we have the capacity in our thinking, already quite well advanced, to impact on the world quite strongly through what we speak. But we also can become aware that through our feeling and through our will, even though we don't do something, we often have a will in our intention or our wishes. We know how to enforce our will upon the world around us, but they will also be a way to take the will in from the world and then develop a way of creating an active side to the passive sense that is developing with that. Now this is quite interesting. So he says the warmth of the heart will then express itself in oscillations and flow outwards together with thought. Through the word, we will externalize what we will. And the expression of the feeling is merely a transition. So ever more and more through the capacity of the human being to speak, we will develop more and more ways of taking what we think and feel and will and create things in the world. So this, as an extended commentary, is also then where Steiner later on in his work does go down another track of developing the senses. So he eventually, later on, through his own research and through his own observations of life realizes that we don't just have the 5 senses, we have 12 senses. So we have a sense of balance, for example, and we have a sense of warmth, and we have a sense of movement. We know when we're moving, we can sense when we're moving and when we're not moving. You can experiment with these things by sitting in a train or a car with your eyes closed, and you know when the train is moving, or if something moves past you the other way, you can get a sense of losing your balance. We have senses, sort of deeper senses around what's going on in us. Some of these senses are about what's happening within the human being, and 7 of them are about what happens outside of us. And beyond hearing, we also have a sense of language, for example, a sense of speech. We know when a sound actually has a meaning within it, even if we can't understand the actual language. We have a sense for language versus just a sense for sound. You could say a sense for music, anything that brings meaning and rhythm into sound. We have a sense for that. We also have a thought sense. We also have a sense of being able to pick up on others' thoughts, and this is where I suppose Rudolf Steiner really pushes us. I think there is some mainstream science that would be exploring the noetic sciences about the impact of thought upon matter, or the impact of emotion. So, for example, in the quantum physics, quantum experiments, what's known as what used to be called the observer effect, that a way a person thinks or feels towards what's going on changes the outcomes. And they are beginning to create calibrated machines to read the impact of the nous, the mind of the human being, upon matter and the outcomes of social processes. So we also then have a sense of the presence of essence of another being. So Rudolf Steiner calls that a 12th sense of, we know if someone is present or not present when we're talking with them. We have a sense of what he calls the self of the other. Now, when we talk about that, so we see in this particular early part of Steiner's life that he's talking about 5 senses and developing another 2 physical senses based in the pituitary and the pineal gland into the future. He also then develops later on in his life a sense of 12 senses that are already well developed in our current world. But he also then says that we need to develop what we call spiritual senses. So that is a tradition in many groups of people. It's not a new thought from Steiner. It's a thought system that has been around probably since human beings became conscious, that we have senses that direct us inside of ourselves. We have senses that teach us about the world, and there's more than just the 5 senses. But then we also can develop, through paying attention, senses that give us information about a more subtle realm. So we could say that we can become, in the sense of language, in the sense of thought, we're already saying that we can sense a capacity of something that isn't just 3-dimensional. It's not just weighed and measured, but we also have the capacity to develop organs of perception for soul processes, and then organs of perception for spiritual processes. And that's all part of the future evolution of humanity. So again, in these lectures, Steiner's talking very strongly about the evolution of consciousness forming the evolution of species. So the two need to work together. He's always very clear that the exoteric isn't, so to say, incorrect, but it's incomplete if it doesn't include the esoteric, the inner side of the other side of reality, which we at this point can't measure in 3 dimensions, but need to develop capacities to once again find a way to perceive the other dimensions. Just as in the old times, people had the capacity, we could talk about the Aboriginal Australians, the dreaming, people have the capacity to perceive beyond the 3 dimensions. So too, now we can also take back the process of developing more senses than just those of the physical senses. This is called the development of, or the tradition of, the spiritual senses. Probably the Western traditions have more difficulty with this, as we've confined our sensorium necessarily into just perceiving what is in the 3-dimensional world, for want of a better word for it. But now we're being challenged. We see scientists who are saying that, for example, when they their science of measuring comes to an end and they can't quite get the results they want. They have to go into a mystical conversation with the unknown. That's the kind of language that's emerging within science at the moment. So yeah, very exciting stuff about how far can we imagine, how far can we challenge our own philosophies about what the human being is and what the capacities are. Again, he talks about how we take the world in through our senses, we digest it in our thinking, our feeling and our willing, and we are finding ways, especially through our speech, to become more and more creative in the world. At this point, we have the capacity to transform the material world, but slowly but surely we will also transform the living world and the social world around us. So that comes later in the lectures. So there's a bit of an expansion. We see here in this lecture that Steiner's quite early in his development of his ideas around the sense world and the capacity of the senses with the human being, just naming 7 senses, and later on he starts to name 12 senses plus some higher senses that align with other philosophies around the world, other sciences, so to say, in the sense that science means to understand, not so physics is one form of science, but there are other sciences where we can understand and bring together the material and the spiritual worlds in full perception and full cognition. That's our sort of journey into the future. Anyway, have a good afternoon. I'll put lecture 10 out there, and hopefully on Tuesday I'll give a commentary on that. Cheers.